I walked into the grocery store that evening with nothing more on my mind than dinner. The day had been long, filled with paperwork, briefings, and the endless tide of issues that a county police commander faces, and I wanted nothing more than to pick up some fresh produce, head home, and have a quiet meal. I pushed my cart slowly through the aisles, enjoying the rare peace of being off duty and anonymous, just another customer under the harsh fluorescent lights. I reached for a cluster of ripe red tomatoes, smooth and firm beneath my hand, and placed them carefully in the cart. That's when I felt the sudden tug. A hand darted in, snatching the tomatoes away with a sharpness that startled me. I turned, and there he was, a young man with a sneer painted across his face, holding the tomatoes like a prize he had just stolen in battle. "People like you don't deserve these," he spat, his voice loud enough for nearby shoppers to hear. For a moment, the words hung in the air, bitter and unmistakably heavy with racism. I could see his eyes, not just full of anger but of entitlement, as though my very presence in that store violated some unwritten rule he believed in. My first instinct as a man was to bristle, to feel the sting of insult, but my second instinct as a commander was to hold steady, to let restraint win over reaction. I asked him calmly to give them back. He laughed, turned his shoulder, and muttered something else under his breath. That's when his mother appeared from the next aisle, a woman in her late 50s with the posture of someone used to command but the arrogance of someone who thought power exempted her from rules. I recognized her face vaguely from community issues. She was the president of the local HOA, a woman whose reputation for hostility and bullying had already made its way into my office more than once. She looked at me, looked at her son gripping the tomatoes, and instead of correcting him, she hardened her voice. "Don't you threaten my son," she snapped, even though no threat had been made. Before I could even reply, she whipped out her phone, dialed 911, and began screaming into the receiver. Her voice rose higher and higher, almost theatrical in its desperation, as she declared that I was a violent man in the store, that I was dangerous, that she and her son feared for their lives. She demanded not just an officer to respond but 20 police cars, 20, as if I was an invading army. In that moment I felt the bitter irony settle in my chest. She was calling the very force I commanded. She was summoning my officers as weapons against me, twisting the truth, banking on the hope that fear and falsehood would do what decency and reason could not. I could have stopped her. I could have revealed myself right then, pulled out my badge, and shut the whole charade down in an instant. But I didn't. Instead, I stood quietly, took out my phone, and began recording. I knew the truth mattered more than my anger. I knew that this wasn't just about me, it was about a pattern of behavior that too many in the community had suffered under silently. She screamed, she gestured, she acted as though the world were collapsing, and I let her dig her own hole deeper with every word. When officers arrived, they looked from her to me, and the realization spread across their faces quickly. I gave a small nod, the kind that told them to keep it professional, to treat this like any other call, to gather information, write it down, and stay calm. She did not recognize me yet. In her eyes, I was still just another black man she had tried to paint as a monster. But the truth has a way of surfacing. Over the next days, evidence piled up. The store's security footage clearly showed her son grabbing my groceries, clearly captured her raising her voice, and showed me standing still, calm and restrained. Hidden cameras in the neighborhood, placed there because of repeated complaints of vandalism, revealed her son spray painting obscenities and slashing tires on the property of residents she disliked. When the community meeting came, it was not a quiet affair. Word had spread of the incident, of the 911 call, of the outrageous demand for 20 cars. The room was packed, residents whispering in the corners, cell phones raised, reporters lingering near the back. I sat not as the accuser but as a witness, letting the facts speak for themselves. One by one, people came forward. Neighbors who had been afraid of her before found their voices. They spoke of harassment, of selective enforcement of HOA rules, of threats and intimidation. They spoke of how they had felt powerless until now. And then the footage rolled. The gasps in the room were audible as her actions and her son's behavior flashed across the screen, undeniable and damning. She tried to interrupt, tried to shout it down, but the tide had turned. Her authority dissolved before her very eyes. I did not need to raise my voice. I did not need to call her names or match her hysteria. All I needed to do was present the truth. The board voted swiftly. She was stripped of her title, her position, her power. The control she had clung to for so long evaporated under the weight of her own arrogance. She had tried to frame me as dangerous, but the danger had always been her unchecked influence, her abuse of power, her willingness to weaponize fear and prejudice. I walked out of that meeting not triumphant but resolved. This was never about revenge. It was about accountability. It was about showing a community that even those who think themselves untouchable must answer to the same laws as everyone else. Later, when asked by reporters what I thought of it all, I said only this: power without accountability corrodes trust. She thought she could bend the law to her will. I showed her that the law bends for no one. And in that truth, the community found justice, and I found a reminder of why I wear this badge in the first place. A local homeowners association president has been formally removed from her position following a racially charged confrontation at a grocery store that quickly escalated into a public scandal and drew national attention. The incident, which began as what some witnesses described as an unprovoked act of hostility, involved the woman's son allegedly seizing produce from the shopping cart of a customer, who later turned out to be none other than the county's police commander, Chief Marcus Washington. According to multiple eyewitness accounts and corroborated by surveillance video later released to investigators, the conflict unfolded in the produce section of a neighborhood grocery store where Chief Washington had stopped after work to buy fresh vegetables. Shoppers recall that Washington had quietly placed a bag of tomatoes in his cart when the young man stepped in abruptly, snatched them, and declared that people like him didn't deserve them. Customers within earshot interpreted the comment as racially motivated, describing it as loud enough to be heard several feet away and laced with hostility. Instead of correcting her son, the HOA president identified in community documents but withheld here to protect ongoing administrative proceedings, reportedly reinforced his behavior. Witnesses say she confronted Washington directly, accusing him of being aggressive despite no evidence of any such conduct. Moments later she dialed 911, her voice rising as she described him to dispatchers as a dangerous threat. During the call, which has since been obtained through public records request, the woman can be heard insisting that at least 20 police vehicles respond to the scene, a demand that investigators later characterized as wildly disproportionate to the situation described. What she did not know at the time was that the man she was attempting to paint as a menace was not only innocent of wrongdoing but also the commanding officer of every police unit in the county. Officers who arrived on scene quickly recognized their chief. According to internal memos, Washington immediately instructed them to follow standard protocol, to treat the call as if it involved any other citizen, and to document the encounter without favoritism. He declined to identify himself to the caller at that moment, instead allowing the situation to unfold in order to preserve the integrity of the investigation. In the days that followed, Chief Washington submitted a full report along with his own personal video recording of the confrontation. Store security footage was reviewed and matched witness accounts, clearly showing the son seizing the tomatoes and his mother making loud, accusatory gestures while Washington remained calm and non-confrontational. The case, however, did not end at the grocery store. Community members, many of whom had long voiced concerns about the HOA president's conduct, began sharing their experiences publicly. Residents alleged years of selective rule enforcement, threats of fines against families she disapproved of, and an atmosphere of intimidation at board meetings. Several homeowners revealed that they had installed hidden cameras around their properties after repeated incidents of vandalism, including spray-painted messages and damage to vehicles. Footage later presented at a community forum appeared to show the same young man involved in the grocery store incident defacing property and engaging in harassment. These revelations shifted the conversation from a single act of prejudice to a larger pattern of abuse of authority. By the time the Homeowners Association convened its next scheduled meeting, public attention had reached a fever pitch. Local reporters crowded into the community center, and residents filled every seat, with others standing along the walls. Tension was high as the board prepared to address the allegations. When the chair called the meeting to order, numerous residents lined up to speak. Some recounted direct confrontations with the president in which they had been threatened with legal action or fines for minor violations, while others described feeling marginalized and unwelcome at community events. Several broke down in tears as they explained the toll the hostility had taken on their families. The turning point came when the board displayed video evidence on a projector screen. The room fell silent as the images of vandalism and harassment played, followed by the grocery store surveillance footage. Gasps were audible when the president's voice from the 911 call was played aloud, her exaggerated claims echoing through the speakers. Attempts by the president to interject were met with murmurs of disapproval from the crowd, and at one point the chair had to call for order as emotions threatened to boil over. Chief Washington, who attended the meeting at the request of the board, declined to speak extensively. He provided a brief statement affirming that he had not sought personal retaliation and that his only aim was to ensure the truth was documented and that accountability prevailed. He emphasized that his role as police commander required impartiality and that he had taken deliberate steps to avoid influencing the process beyond presenting evidence. Following hours of testimony and deliberation, the board voted in favor of immediate removal of the president from her position. The decision was met with applause and, according to attendees, a palpable sense of relief that a long-standing source of division within the neighborhood was finally being addressed. In the aftermath, the story spread quickly beyond the community. Clips from the meeting circulated on social media platforms, garnering millions of views within days. Hashtags calling for accountability and praising Washington's restraint trended regionally, and national outlets picked up the story as an example of how abuse of authority at the local level can be exposed when documentation and community voices converge. Legal experts interviewed by local media noted that the incident underscored the importance of body cameras, surveillance, and public access to emergency call records. Civil rights advocates pointed to the case as another reminder of how false emergency calls targeting minorities can escalate dangerously, citing past tragedies where officers arrived under the assumption of immediate threat. Chief Washington himself later addressed the media in a formal press conference. Standing at the podium in uniform, flanked by department officials, he reiterated that the incident was never about personal vengeance. Public trust is built on transparency and the rule of law, he said. When a false report is made, it will be investigated thoroughly and fairly, no matter who is involved. The law applies equally to everyone. He added that the officers who responded to the call had acted professionally and that he was proud of their composure under unusual circumstances. The HOA has since scheduled a special election to fill the vacant leadership position, and residents have pledged to implement new oversight measures to prevent similar abuses of authority in the future. As for the former president, she has not responded to repeated requests for comment. Her son, also implicated in the vandalism footage, is under review by local prosecutors for potential misdemeanor charges. What began as a dispute over tomatoes in a grocery store has become a case study in how small acts of prejudice, when amplified by positions of power, can unravel into major community crises. It has also become a reminder that accountability, when paired with patience and evidence, can restore balance even in the face of deliberate deception. I went to the grocery store for something as simple as tomatoes, thinking about dinner, thinking about how nice it would be to get home and have a quiet evening. I pushed my cart slowly, moving past the greens, the apples, the peppers, until I spotted a batch of tomatoes that looked just right, bright red, firm, fresh. I picked them up and placed them carefully in my cart. That was all I wanted, nothing more, nothing less. But the moment felt stolen when a young man suddenly reached into my cart, grabbed the tomatoes right out, and stared at me with a look that carried years of prejudice condensed into one glare. "People like you don't deserve these," he said, loud enough for people nearby to stop what they were doing. For a moment, time froze. Shoppers turned, some gasping, some whispering. My heart didn't race. I faced worse in uniform, but my stomach sank because this wasn't just about groceries. It was about the poison of entitlement, the kind that thinks it can strip dignity away with a sentence. I kept calm, because that's who I am, because letting anger answer anger only feeds the fire. I told him quietly to give them back, but he laughed under his breath and tightened his grip on the bag as if daring me to do something. Then she arrived, his mother. A woman with an air of authority she hadn't earned but demanded anyway. She was the president of the neighborhood HOA, and if you've never dealt with a petty tyrant in an HOA role, you might not know the way power can twist into a weapon. She stepped between us like a shield for her son, her eyes sharp, her voice dripping with accusation. "Don't you threaten my boy," she snapped, flipping the narrative in one breath, rewriting the scene so fast that if there hadn't been witnesses, you might almost believe her. Before I could reply, she pulled out her phone, her fingers trembling not with fear but with fury, and dialed 911. I stood still, watching as she raised her voice into the receiver, shouting that I was a threat, that I was dangerous, that she needed protection immediately. Her voice cracked with dramatics as she demanded not just one car, not two, but 20 police cars to storm the parking lot as if I were a mob boss. I could hear the disbelief even in the dispatcher's silence between her words. What she didn't know, what she couldn't know, was that I am Chief Marcus Washington, commander of every single officer in this county. She thought she was summoning an army to crush me. In reality, she was calling my army, my people, my officers. I could have ended it right there. I could have flashed my badge, told her exactly who I was, and watched her arrogance collapse. But I didn't. Because this wasn't about my pride. It was about exposing something bigger than me. So I stood calm, pulled out my phone, and recorded. I knew the evidence would matter. I knew the truth would tell the story better than any argument I could make in that aisle. Minutes later, the officers arrived. I saw the flicker of recognition in their eyes as they spotted me, their chief, standing silent while a woman pointed at me as though I were a criminal. I gave them a small nod, the kind that says, "Do your job. Stay professional. Document everything." They did exactly that. They asked questions, wrote notes, and kept their composure even as the woman grew louder and more frantic, demanding that they take me away, shouting that her word should be enough. Her son stood smug beside her, clutching the tomatoes like some twisted badge of victory. But the truth has a way of catching up. The next few days changed everything. The store released surveillance footage that showed exactly what happened, me calmly shopping, her son seizing the tomatoes, her escalating the scene with lies. Neighbors came forward with stories of harassment, of petty fines, of intimidation that had gone unchecked for years under her HOA reign. Some revealed hidden camera footage from their properties, spray-painted slurs, keyed cars, trash dumped deliberately on lawns. Faces in those videos matched the son who thought he could humiliate me in a grocery store. By the time the community meeting came, the tension in the air was electric. The room overflowed, every chair filled, cameras rolling, phones recording. Reporters lined the back walls. People who had once been too scared to speak finally had a reason to raise their voices. One after another, residents stood at the microphone and told their stories, stories of bullying, of threats, of retaliation when they dared to push back against her. Some cried, some shook with rage, but all of them spoke with a shared relief that the truth was finally in the open. Then came the videos. The hidden camera clips played across a projector screen for everyone to see. Gasps filled the room as her son's face appeared again and again in acts of vandalism. And then the grocery store footage rolled, showing in crystal clarity what had really happened that day. Her voice on the 911 call echoed through the speakers, her exaggerated claims, her demands for 20 police cars. She shifted in her seat, trying to interject, but the crowd had turned. The board sat stone-faced, watching as their president's credibility evaporated before them. I sat quietly. I didn't gloat, didn't shout, didn't raise my voice. I didn't need to. The evidence did all the speaking. When the vote came, it was swift. Unanimous. She was stripped of her title, her control, her seat at the head of the HOA. The applause that followed wasn't just relief, it was catharsis, the sound of a community freed from the grip of someone who had abused her position for too long. That night, the story spread like wildfire. Clips from the meeting hit social media, racking up views in the millions. Hashtags flew across Twitter and TikTok. Strangers from across the country shared their own HOA horror stories, calling what happened in our town a victory for accountability everywhere. Some called it poetic justice. Others called it karma. I just called it the truth finally winning. The irony was not lost on anyone. She had tried to weaponize the police against me, not knowing I was the one who commanded them all. She had tried to turn lies into power, but power built on lies never lasts. The badge I carry isn't for show. It isn't for revenge. It's for justice. And justice doesn't bend for anyone, not even an HOA president who thought she could. That night, as I put the tomatoes, yes, I went back and bought them on my counter at home, I thought about how small acts can reveal big truths. she thought it was just groceries. But what she didn't realize was that every time you abuse power, you set yourself up for the moment when truth catches you. And when it does, no title, no false authority, number 911 call can protect you.